Well, hi, Gordon Parks.
Hi, Michael. Good to see you.
You too. Would you like to start out by just introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about you and your history in pipe bands?
Yes, my history in pipe bands, I know I don't look that old, but it goes back 50 years, where my brother and I, 50 years ago this year, joined the one band that we played in, which was Field Marshal Montgomery Pipe Band. I played with the band for 30 years and then retired in 1999. And since retiring, then I had an active involvement for many years with City of Dunedin in Florida and played with them as a guest player for 2005, 2007. So I've really only ever played for two pipe bands, but over a significant period, almost a 40-year period.
That's amazing. So you were a part of Field Marshal Montgomery, you and your brother Richard, when they were in grade 3.
Yes.
Can you tell us about what was life like for you guys, and what was pipe bands? You know, why did you guys get involved in pipe bands to begin with, and what brought you to this ensemble that we all know and love today?
Well, Richard and I had uncles. One was a piper, one was a drummer.
Okay.
And they played at that time in a band called Raffray, and Raffray had merged with Field Marshal Montgomery because both bands at that time didn't have enough members to compete, so they combined. The combined band was called Fremont, which was an amalgamation of Raffray and Field Marshal Montgomery.
Okay.
And
clever.
50 years ago, we joined that grade 3 band as playing members to learn from scratch.
Okay.
Back then, 50 years ago, my first teacher didn't teach using written music. He taught using the rote method. So I was taught, along with all the other drummers at that time, everything you learned straight from memory. The advantage of that was it's going straight into your head and it's staying there, and it's not detracting from the actual music in terms of trying to read something and trying to make it musical at the same time. My sense was that by learning through the rote method, that what was happening was it was ensuring that the chorus back then, and a lot of the chorus coming through in Northern Ireland, had a much more musical feeling and much more musical influence in the way they played.
Yeah, and this is a tradition, if you will, that seems to be continued today, that many instructors here in Northern Ireland, they start students out by rote or by singing or whistling and then going to the sticks, and then years later, correct? They start to learn about the dots. Is that right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, there are a number of chords now. I mean, we have the piping and drumming schools here now. Everyone is taught music from day one, but a lot of teachers would primarily use the rote method and the music and use them in combination. So you're getting the advantages of both. People are committing to memory initially, but they're also ensuring that the hands are right and that all the movements and rudiments are all played in the right way as per the music. So the balanced approach is what's being used now. Certainly, you know, one of the things I experienced when I went to teach in the States for the first time was it was completely the reverse. Everybody was totally learning from music. Take the music away, they couldn't play anything.
That's right.
I found that amazing.
Yeah, and I'm a product of this. You know, I like to say that I am a product of Western Art Society, and the Western path is we normally don't start music until about 11 or 12, you know, for us 5th or 6th grade, and you're in concert bands. And concert band means you figure out your instrument, and I mean, one of the first things you learn to do is the book from which you will study. You open the book, then you get out your instrument, right? And I'm an advocate of this, sure. I'm an advocate of music reading. I think any musician is, but I would never, ever, ever say you must read music to play an instrument, or even you must read music to play in pipe bands, because I think it's proof in the pudding, if you will, that, I mean, so many guys like yourself were raised the exact opposite way. And I agree. I think there's an enormous advantage to that. I know that for me, I can read music very well, and that seems really impressive at first. You just put music in front of me or people that have been in my path, and we can lay it down. We can perform it right now. But in pipe bands, in most scenarios, you can't read the sheets when you play. And I think that there is something limiting about that. In a sense, you could learn that the music is what you are looking at on the page, and that just isn't true.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, I would suggest somebody should try, if they have never done it before, try learning a couple of parts without the music.
Yeah.
Because it's a whole different process for your brain.
Yeah.
And then, by all means, once you've learned it, committed it to memory, then check it out against the music.
Sure.
But you'll find if you've learned the tune and the score that way, you're going to be playing that tune more musically than the one that you've used, where you've learned the music first and then try to commit it to memory. So try a reverse process. I think it's a concept that can improve the musicality of a lot of players.
I think that's a phenomenal thing. I want to go try that now. I want to try, a drum score on Rhythm Monster without the sheets and just see if I can listen to one part and see if I can try to absorb that without having to look at the music. I mean, that'd be a great way, I think, for anyone to work on that. What would you say to someone in the States, whether it's a younger learner or an adult learner, who is they're uncomfortable with the fact that they can't read music, but they love pipe bands, they love pipe band drumming, they want to participate, and they feel ashamed almost that they can't read music? What would you say to them?
I think that's certainly a cultural thing. Young drummers here, there's no shame in it. It's, people here have been brought up without that. So anyone that can't read music, the music can come afterwards. You can learn the music, and it actually becomes easier to learn how to read the music once you've perfected your technique, and once you've had a good teacher who's walked you through all the various rudiments and you've learned them properly and you've learned some basic scores. You can then begin to learn the music in a much easier way once you've perfected your technique using the root method.
I love it. I couldn't agree more. I mean, it is in fact how all of us have learned language. None of us learned to read before we learned how to speak or write. We all learned how to use our voice and how to communicate with people. We learned how to make basic scribbles and drawings, and then later we put the pieces together in reading and writing.
And that's a great analogy, Michael. I mean, we're sitting generally talking here without any script.
Nope.
Let's me put a script in front of you now right away. It becomes less natural.
Yes.
That's what happens in music.
It becomes acting or reading. It becomes something totally different. And I think you're 100% right. And again, I can say for me personally, it's been a huge struggle. It'd be a struggle today, whether it's a grade 1 pipe band, a symphony orchestra, anything else I need to play in. If I can read what I'm performing, I'm comfy, because there's a job, if you will, of executing the music. But if I have to commit it to memory and make it something that's more ingrained in me, it's really difficult. And I recognize that as a weakness. And so when I encounter especially pipe band drummers in the States who, again, feel a little ashamed that they can't read music, I try to help them to understand exactly what you're saying. Yes, learning to read music will help you in ways, but it doesn't mean that it's a requirement. And in fact, it might actually be a hindrance to you personally from just learning to listen and then to be able to replicate that.
Yeah.
I think that's great. I definitely think that's something we can all do a little bit more. And we have a really cool music theory tutor on the website right now that helps you learn the dots. Because we had a lot of responses and requests for that. And even in building that tool, I've been thinking about this exact conversation. What could we do to help people learn by rote digitally? And that'll be some more fun stuff to explore. So you are all over the world adjudicating now and teaching more than anything, right?
Yes.
What has been, from your perspective, some of the most radical evolutions in pipe bands? I mean, again, you were in Field Marshal Montgomery when they were in grade 3 and brought them all the way to the highest of the highs, and are now helping spread the good word of pipe bands all over the world. You've seen so much over that span of time. What are some of the more radical evolutions you've witnessed?
I've been judging for 27 years now, and obviously the most radical revolutions are in the technology, both in the pipes and in the drums. The drum technology is amazing now in terms of the reliability and the quality of drums from all the manufacturers.
Just the make of the instruments and stuff, right? Yeah.
I mean, certainly I go back to my early days playing, and you tune a drum and 10 minutes later you had to retune, then had to retune again, whereas now the guys, they don't know how easy they have it now with the wonderful quality of the instruments and the quality of the technology and the materials that are going into the drums. The structure of the drum shells plus the heads, making a huge difference.
It's all just class, right? And regardless of the size of the company, if they're making bagpipes, drums, head sticks, whatever, they're making them to a really high quality. Would you happen to have any of the gear that you used back in the day?
Oh yes.
Do you? Yeah.
I still have 3 drums from each of the different generations of when I played. Yeah.
That's fantastic. I definitely think that there's a special and whimsical quality to especially drums, made back then, because they're just simply made differently now. So those instruments that have survived, I think, are treasures.
Yeah.
Those are fantastic.
And when you listen to some of the scores and some of the pipe band cores and some of the stuff they were playing way back then, and there wasn't the same response off the head.
Sure.
Those guys had fantastic hands to be able to produce that sound back then of that sort of response from a head.
Absolutely. And here's another, there was almost a clear divide of Mylar, Kevlar. And a lot of people don't realize this that do American drumming, because in America we think we invented everything, right? The pipe band guys were actually using Kevlar years before you started seeing it normalized in the States. But to the Mylar Kevlar thing, you were a part of that line in the sand where you went from one to the other suddenly. What was that like? What was it like being raised and perfecting your craft on Mylar, and then all of a sudden one day there's this new Kevlar thing in there?
It was a totally different response rate in terms of the bounce back from the stick. So your grip had to be adjusted. And you see the modern guys now playing much more with the finger thumb, whereas the grip used to be a lot more tighter on the right hand. And back then you were having to grip differently with your left hand as well.
Absolutely.
So the whole grip process had to change when the heads became so much more responsive.
And you guys recognize that, I'm sure, right away, right? What sort of efforts did you and your core have to go through to change your technique and approach?
I think it had to go right back to the type of practice pads you used as well, in terms of the bounce from the rubber and so on that you were using, which is why there's been such I believe, a strong emergence of all these wonderful practice pads. That's mirroring what's been happening with the heads on the drum.
Absolutely.
So when the guys are transferring from their practice pad to the drum, it's a seamless process.
It's more similar, or should be, right? Absolutely. I don't remember the Mylar days. In the States, you started seeing Kevlar come into play again a few years after the pipe band guys. So we're talking early 90s is about when Kevlar started being normalized. So that's around when I started drumming Indian at all. There were some similar things happening with drum set and with symphonic percussion, but it was much more radical and marching. So I say all this because I did not experience playing rudimental drumming on Mylar heads until long after I realized how awesome it was.
Yeah.
And now, if you ever hear a Mylar pipe band drum, is there something special that resonates in you when you hear that sound?
Yeah, interesting thing for me was the sound of a drag on Mylar versus the sound of a drag in Kevlar. I always felt that wee bit more elongated. Just even get those guys that could get the stick down and up quickly.
Yeah,
it was more a broader sound than the sound you got on Kevlar.
You had to have been more aggressive with that dead stick, right, to really make it a different color. Yeah. That's really cool. I think even that, I think that there's a lot today players could learn and would be influenced by, to see those Mylar approached hands on those Mylar instruments. I think there's a world of music in and of itself. That would be cool. Maybe we should come up with a retro category in pipe bands so we can bring back the old gear and the old sounds.
Bring the oldies back.
Oh my goodness. From a drumming perspective, I think that'd be fantastic. I'm not sure about the pipes. Do you miss the old bagpipe sounds and the old tuning and setup there?
Oh yeah, and even the smells of the bagpipes, back in terms of what went into the bag and seasoning and all of that sort of stuff. Yeah,
absolutely. That's excellent. So, are you ready for a slightly more philosophical question? Okay. So first, we're going to start a little surface, and that is, what makes a good drummer?
For me, drumming comes from the heart. If you go right back to basics, we all start as energy. And energy starts as rhythm, and drumming is all about rhythm. So rhythm has to come from the heart. And I love the quote that you have on your website that rules come from the soul, drumming comes from the heart. So for me, what makes a good drummer is what makes us live, which is energy. So the first thing I'm looking for in a good drummer is it's got to be energy. These drummers standing head buried in the drum, no energy, dead, they're not drumming. So energy, passion, commitment to the drum, going for it. Even if you make a mistake, go for it rather than being timid. So it's energy, passion, drive, commitment, and seeing that in the scores and in the cores. I'm not going to mention any modern day drummers. There's lots of good drummers doing that, but go back and look at all the greats like the Alec Duthards, the Tom Browns, the Joe Nobles, all those guys. One thing in common: energy, passion, commitment from all of them.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, of that list, the only one I've had a pleasure of spending any time with is Tom Brown. And my goodness, I mean, I remember seeing Tom Brown for the first time in my life, maybe 07, 08 or whatever. I knew the name, but didn't know who he was. And all I remember is seeing this elderly, distinguished gentleman kind of floating around Bog Hall with the biggest smile on his face, kind of looking up with his eyes closed. And then when I got to meet him years later and speak to him a little bit, it was just oozing with passion. I mean, as if he had just walked in the door in the first day. And honestly, I think the same thing about guys like you. I mean, there's clearly an aura of passion about music and drumming that, of course, is centered around pipe bands, but extends well beyond that. And that's a beautiful thing. What would you say to someone who maybe is missing that a little bit or losing sight of it just because what we do is so competitive? We're all trying to get the trophies, we're all trying to get the upgrade, and there's, I think a lot of people feel a little unbalanced. They love music and they love pipe bands or they wouldn't be in it, but all the conversation and all the focus seems to be on those trophies. And we all want to do well. We're all striving for excellence in by our own definition. You're clearly someone who has found a beautiful balance in that regard. What would you say to other people who are maybe struggling to find that balance?
I think first of all, competition and the competitive spirit that we all have is something that should be valued. The downside of that competitiveness and that focus on being competitive is that you can lose enjoyment, and that particularly if people are playing and competing and not being successful by whatever means they want to be judged. And there's so much more to music than the competition element. You play music first and foremost for enjoyment. Yeah. That's why you should be playing it. So anyone who's a drummer, who's in the whole process of drumming, should be looking around and looking at all the best and exploring what they do, and then learning that themselves and bringing it back for their own enjoyment first and foremost, and please themselves. Forget about the judge, forget about what other people think. Please yourself, enjoy what you're doing, look at what someone's doing, try to replicate it, try to get as much mentoring and coaching as you can.
Sure.
And then the main thing is, if you're not enjoying it, then find other ways. I mean, move yourself out of the competitive scene and go into something that's less competitive and do something that's primarily there for enjoyment as opposed to winning a prize.
I couldn't agree more, and it's great to hear someone like you say such meaningful things. If I'm ever working with a pipe band who has those struggles, I mean that's usually a way I try to steer them is say, let's try to focus on next weekend's parade, or whenever you have a chance to play in front of your community or a pub or somewhere. Let's actually talk about playing those parade sets that maybe you don't think about too much better, where you feel proud about how well you played them and people actually respond. Let's talk about learning a really easy drum salute so you can actually focus on you and your community, even if it has nothing to do with what you do in the circle. Because if you do that, if you do it well and you have a good time and people respond to you positively, that will probably roll over into your competitive execution as well. That's a beautiful thing to hear. So here at Rhythm Monster, we try to impart as much as we can of the pipe band world. We try to provide as much exposure as we can to awesome guys like you and awesome drum corps, and provide as much education as we can. But it seems to center around everyone in our community being called monster drummers, right? And what's really interesting is everyone we talk to about that seems to have a different definition of what that is or what that means. And it's honestly not even something I've ever really thought about, right? I think all of us inside feel like monster drummers, but that seems to mean something different. So Gordon Parks, what does a monster drummer mean to you?
The beauty about drumming is it's very different depending on the drum corps or the leading drummer, and it's all unique and it's all individual. And the fact that each leading drummer can arrange and develop their own scores to what are the same tunes gives an individuality to a drum corps and to individuals within that corps that you don't get if you're a piper, where you've got to subscribe to a tune. Right. So there's a beauty there in relation to the creativity that's allowed to happen. So for me, the fact that you've got all these different arrangements to the same tunes and you can listen to them all and see the beauty and the value of each of them, I think is superb. And I only really really began to appreciate that when I stopped competitive playing in grade 1. I wrote and played all my own scores with the help of some of my own drummers in my own corps for 30 years. Exclusively. Yeah. We didn't play any other scores. But as soon as I retired from grade 1 and started to work with other bands, I started to learn other scores like Alec Duthart scores and really began to appreciate the beauty of those scores and the value of them. And I began to think, I should have done some of that when I was in grade 1.
Yeah.
But being able to just play your own material has its value, but it also has its downsides. I think the real value is being able to, and that's the real value in your site, being able to get access to all these wonderful scores from all these different drummers, being able to see what they all do, compare, contrast, say, there's something that's wonderful there, this is maybe not so good, pick the best from all of them. Yeah. I think that's the real value of your site. There's now a world and a wealth of material there for drummers to be able to look at and be able to assess in a way that was never available before.
Man, it warms my heart to hear you say that. I mean, this is exactly what we're trying to do. So it sounds like for Gordon Parks, a monster drummer is a drummer who is his or her own drummer and not trying to replicate specifically any individual.
Original and innovative.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Mm-hmm. Some might say that there's no room for that in competitive pipe bands, that there's a script, there's a rule list, and you have to follow the script, follow the rule list to be competitively successful. There's no room for innovation. There's no room for creativity. What would you say to someone who thinks that?
I think the very opposite is what's true. There's huge room for innovation. And I'm going to be slightly controversial here because the greatest drummer in pipe band history is Alec Duthart. Mm-hmm. And I believe in this, I'm not criticizing the individual, but Alec Duthart was both the best and the worst thing that ever happened to pipe bands. Uh-huh. The reason he was the best thing was he was so good and he was so powerful. The reason that in one sense he was the worst thing is so many drummers never decided to play their own stuff. They decided, I've got to play what Alec plays or nothing else.
Okay.
So we had such a powerful influence for so many years. I believe that influence of that very capable, powerful, wonderful drummer stifled innovation. And that wasn't his fault, that was the drummer's fault. Yeah. Because the drummers themselves were saying, it's either that for me or nothing. I know some hugely capable drummers over many years would only ever play Alex scores and nothing else.
That's
so
interesting.
I think that we have moved away from that now. You see a huge amount of originality, but you still see people using all the best scores from Alex still there, but they're there in combination with other scores.
Absolutely.
But I think drumming has, in a way that no other art form or musical instrument has the ability to have so many different styles, so many different influences, taking the same melody and putting so many different rhythms to it and experimenting with it. There's huge scope for innovation.
Again, it's awesome to hear you say that. I couldn't agree more. And combined with your previous comment about the manufacturing of the instruments now, you can be a grade 4 band and finish, middle of the top of the pack at all of your contests. But no one can have the exact combination of your drumsticks, your drum heads, your drums, your players, your compositions, and the way you swing that quick march medley. That is a world of variables. And I feel, I feel that's something that could and should be embraced more. You don't have to have all the skill in the world. You don't even have to have the best gear in the world, because whatever combination you have, as long as it's within the spectrum of what we do here, right? Can be completely unique and completely beautiful. And if you'd like to, you can get it to a degree where you're winning your respective contest or whatever. So, I agree. I think that there is room for creativity in there, that we don't have to model ourselves off of any individual drummer. That's a tough thing to do. It's a tough thing to really be able to imagine how your drum corps would do something unique, but stay within the competitive realm. What would you do to help someone out who maybe doesn't feel super creative or innovative intuitively? What would you do? What would you tell them to help them exercise those muscles?
The first thing about the creativity and trying to be original, the potential downside of that in the competition arena is many judges would have come through a certain type of style,
certain school,
and have certain views, whether it be the Alec Duthart route or whatever, and so they've got views of what make good scores and what doesn't. So if you're totally original, you're outside what their paradigm is, and that can affect your results. So if you're in there purely for results and results only, then the innovation is going to be less important to you. Conforming is going to be more important to you because you'll want to play scores that the adjudicators and judges can identify with.
Yes.
But that's why I would encourage people that first and foremost in the enjoyment piece, what you need to do is to look right back at what are the things you like to play, what are the things you enjoy playing, and when you listen, what really do you hear around you that you feel that's what gives me the energy to want to really play. Because if you're playing something you don't enjoy, it's going to come through in your performance.
I think that's such an important thing for any level of band to hear when they ask, is the composition good? Typically the first question is, well, who wrote it? And that's a legitimate question. But for any individual drum corps, doesn't matter what grade level, that's the question to ask. Are you having fun playing these scores? Because if you're not, they're just not the right drum scores for you. It doesn't mean that they're bad. It doesn't mean they don't work. But if your corps, if your team is not having a good time with every single phrase, every single rudiment, make it fun. You know, do something that is more enjoyable. And I think that seems to be a message from you that I think needs to be reiterated is it's okay to have fun. And in fact, the more fun you have, perhaps the more competitively successful you will be.
And ultimately the better you will become.